think all companies should have an answer to the question, why do we exist?
Business is a team sport that you learn by doing.
It's not about who's right, but what's right.
Bigger isn't better, better is better.
I was actually feeling kind of lost.
If I'm not Pime from Carrot, who am I now? You're supposed to be happy and you are devastated. What is that about?
You are already more valuable right now than anything you will ever do or accomplish.
Keep putting energy in. All of a sudden, the flywheel starts to turn.
If you're an outsider, tell your story.
You can't wait for the spotlight to shine on you. You have to generate belief.
Welcome back to Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathaway. In our last episode, we started talking about the Outsider Playbook, things every outsider founder knows in their bones, how being underestimated builds hunger, how constraint forces systematic thinking, and how the outsider toolkit of bootstrapping, hustle, and resilience aren't just survival skills. They're competitive advantages that can only be forged through experience. Today, we're continuing that conversation because once you've actually built something, once you've proven the doubters wrong and scaled against the odds, the challenge doesn't disappear. It transforms into something harder. Now you need a culture that can sustain itself when you're no longer in every room. The kind that shows up in who people hire, what they reward, how they make decisions without you, how they treat customers when no one's watching, and how they show up for each other when things go sideways. Then there's an identity crisis most founders don't see coming. You've spent years, maybe decades, pouring everything you are into what you're building. The company's wins are your wins. Its struggles are your struggles. And then one day, whether it's an exit, a transition, or just the natural evolution of scale, you have to answer a question you've been avoiding. When it's no longer my company, who am I? And if you're fortunate enough to succeed, you face an even deeper question. What do you do with that success? Do you take your winnings and move on? Or do you pay it forward in ways that don't just help individual founders, but actually shift the landscape for everyone who comes next? Because here's what we've learned from 25 conversations with outsider founders, investors, and ecosystem builders. The real goal was never just proving the doubters wrong. It was never just building one breakout company from an unlikely place. The goal is turning their stories into validation. Proof that makes the next outsider's pitch a little easier to believe. Infrastructure that makes their path a little less lonely. Capital that flows to places it never reached before. And ultimately, an ecosystem where being an outsider stops being a liability and starts being recognized for what it actually is, a competitive advantage. The foundation for all of it starts with something most founders treat as an afterthought until it's too late, the intentional work of building culture. Most founders treat culture as something you think about after product market fit. After the first big customer, after the Series A, after the urgent stuff is handled. But ask any founder who's built something that lasted, and they'll tell you differently. When you're building far from the center, when talent is scarce and capital is scarcer, culture isn't optional. It's often the only sustainable advantage you have. Just take it from Kyle Porter, the founder and former CEO of SalesLoft, who built the company into a category-defining sales engagement platform worth over $2 billion.
I think all companies should have an answer to the question, why do we exist? And if what you're doing today is not fulfilling the answer to that question, then you've got to go some other direction. No matter what, I want to run a business with culture at the center of everything. As a founder, the values that I have and that we have as a company is something I have total control over. And there's not a lot you have total control over, but that's one thing.
You can't control the conditions you're building in. You don't control the market, the timing, the competition, or whether the fundraising environment turns against you. But you do control the kind of company you're trying to build inside those conditions. What you value, what you reward, how decisions get made, how people treat each other when the plan changes. That's the first mature lesson in this part of the Outsider Playbook. Culture is not a perk you earn later. It's the operating system that makes execution possible under pressure. But here's the question. How do you actually build it? For some founders, culture starts by paying attention. You watch who thrives, study how they work, and reverse engineer the traits that make them successful. Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier, sees it that way.
You're going to want to have a way of thinking about what makes somebody particularly great at your company. You know, when you get your first early employees, you're probably going to notice some of these folks, you're just like, this just wasn't a fit. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe it's their fault. Probably a little bit of both. But you really want to pay attention to the ones that are like really awesome. And you start to reverse engineer. What is it about the way they show up at work? What is it about the way they interact with you and the rest of the team that makes that such a great experience? And then you can start to back into a set of things in your rubric that you go hire for. And these are things that are going to be agnostic of skill set. Look at how Facebook runs its company. Move fast and break things. And you contrast that with Apple. Hey, we're going to measure twice and cut once. Two very opposing ways of thinking about it. Two incredible companies. Both have been amazingly successful, but you couldn't have two more different ways of working. And so I think you kind of have to establish those things and how those work for you. Otherwise, you're going to get pulled apart at the seams amongst this team that you're building because the way in which folks approach work will be too different.
You hire, you watch, you identify patterns. Then you turn those patterns into principles. But one of the easiest mistakes founders make is confusing culture with the visible stuff. The parties, the perks, the things that look like culture from the outside. Real culture is deeper than that. It's the values people share, the behaviors that get rewarded, a shared perspective of what it looks like to do the work the right way. Shegun Otulana, who built Theranos from Birmingham, Alabama into a billion-dollar company, didn't have money for the Silicon Valley version of culture. And that forced him to get clear about what culture really meant.
For us, culture never meant keg parties or things like that because we didn't have the funds to do that. Culture for us meant really alignment of values, doing whatever we had to do to make the customer happy. Culture meant, since we're not all in the same room, you have to be able to exercise good judgment. And here are the rules and the guardrails for exercising the good judgment. Now go run with it. Culture meant move fast, and we rewarded that. And culture also meant learn and share. The place where I would say we didn't do a good enough job as we got bigger was we didn't ritualize enough of those things, because the way you reinforce culture is through storytelling and ritualization. My own individual interactions with people was a lot of what sustained the culture in the early days, but that is not going to scale.
That's the trap. Early culture is relational. People know the founder. They hear the stories. They watch the decisions. They absorb the values through proximity. But scale creates distance. And if you don't turn the founder's instincts into rituals, stories, and operating principles, then culture becomes dependent on access to the founder. The people close to you get it. Everyone else is guessing. So whether you're reverse engineering culture from who succeeds or defining it from what you value, eventually you have to do the same thing. Make it real. Make it repeatable. Make it survive when you're not in the room. And that means building rituals. Doug Song, who co-founded Duo Security in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and sold it to Cisco for $2.35 billion, borrowed some of Duo's most important cultural habits from an unlikely source.
We took as many lessons from Zingerman's, a Jewish deli down the street from us. And a lot of these things were like the basic kind of rituals and operational behaviors. We had open book finance. Everyone in Duo knew all of our spend and our revenue numbers, all this stuff. Another thing we took from them that I think is also sort of very Midwestern is this ritual of appreciations. For every team meeting, we started or ended with 3 to 5 minutes of thanking each other for the specific things other team members do that made the team successful. And that really is what I think drove a lot of the success in learning our business. We did that in a way that elevated and standardized excellence. You sort of got to understand quickly how people were successful and other people would model it. Everyone did it together and we all learned together. It's not about who's right, but what's right. To really be an effective team, we have to go out of our way to help each other be successful. By defining kind of our culture, we defined our behavior, and that ultimately led to our results.
Appreciations weren't just feel-good moments. They were a feedback system. They showed the company what excellence looked like. They helped people understand which behaviors actually moved the business forward. But more than that, they turned culture from an idea into a practice. Help each other be successful. Sounds good on a value slide, but when every team meeting includes people naming the specific ways their teammates help them win, the value becomes visible. It becomes repeatable. It's part of how the company learns. That's the power of ritual. It takes the thing you say you believe and turns it into something people actually do. Doug Song shows how culture becomes behavior. And Scott Dorsey from ExactTarget shows what can happen when those behaviors become something even bigger, a shared identity. ExactTarget's $2.5 billion acquisition by Salesforce gets the headlines, but its legacy wasn't the exit. It was the culture the company built along the way. A culture so distinctive that employees, customers, and partners could feel it. Eventually, they gave that feeling a name.
Along our journey, we felt like we were building something special. We had a strong, kind of tight-knit culture, and partners and customers and employees would really feel it, but we didn't have a great way to describe it. And our CMO, Tim Kopp, came up with really the brilliant idea of kind of creating a brand framework or an identity for our culture called Orange or Be Orange. Turned out to be one of the best moves we ever made because it brought color and identity to a feeling that all of us had. And when we were going through our real surge of hiring and doing acquisitions and opening offices all around the world, it became the thread that knitted all of us together. Employee onboarding became called officially Orange. And any hire all around the world, you'd fly to Indianapolis, go through 2 weeks of training, and really get kind of indoctrinated into our team and our culture. We started investing in leadership development, and that became Leading Orange. And what I really, really loved about Orange is that we didn't mandate too strong of a narrative or language around what the culture meant. We really left it open for everyone's individual interpretation. And I think you have a powerful culture when people feel it, experience it, and kind of describe it in their own words.
That's the difference between a slogan and a shared identity. ExactTarget didn't start with a corporate framework. It started with a feeling. The work was to give that feeling language, rituals, and a meaning so it could survive growth. And unsurprisingly, it did.
I would say our culture still lives on today, over a decade longer than when the company even existed. We have a Facebook group called Orange Crush with a couple thousand members, and people are posting several times a week, photos, pictures, career updates, life changes. We had a 10-year reunion where we threw a party here in Indianapolis. We had over 1,000 people attend the reunion, many flying in from all over the world just to reconnect with friends and kind of relive that Orange culture where people felt such a strong connection to one another, what we built. And then to see that live on in a number of different ways is really, really rewarding.
1,000 people flying in from all over the world 10 years after the acquisition for a culture, not a company. That's what durable culture looks like. But culture isn't only how you behave when things are working. It's also what pulls you back when growth starts to pull you off course. Because success creates its own kind of pressure. More markets, more partners, more opportunities, more reasons to stretch beyond the principles that made the company work in the first place. And when that happens, culture becomes a compass. It reminds you what you're actually optimizing for and helps you recognize the difference between real growth and drift. David Cohen, who co-founded Techstars and helped build one of the most influential startup accelerators in the world, put that into practice when he recently returned to the CEO role.
There was so much pull going on for us to be in so many places. And some of those places we had to say, yeah, this isn't working. It's not the right market for us, wrong people, or this doesn't work culturally with how we do things. When I came back almost 2 years ago now as CEO, I did so with a set of recommitments. One of them was bigger isn't better, better is better. We're very careful now about where we're expanding to, the companies we're investing in. There's been a real return to that focus on quality and just better being better.
Bigger isn't better. Better is better. That's culture as discipline, because growth pressure always pulls you toward more markets, more programs, more opportunities, more reasons to stretch beyond what you know how to do well. David's recommitment was about resisting that pull, getting back to the right markets, the right people, and the standards that made Techstars work in the first place. And when culture really works, when you stay true to it, something remarkable happens. Future leaders emerge from your company carrying those principles with them. Day-to-day conflicts get resolved through process, not emotion, and the team moves as one. Gail Goodman built that kind of discipline into Constant Contact, the email marketing platform she grew over 17 years, took public, and ultimately led to a $1.1 billion acquisition.
Business is a team sport that you learn by doing. Something that shaped me early, mostly by seeing really bad CEOs. I worked for a few. I did see some horrible dysfunction. The biggest thing I saw was just wasted resource because of lack of alignment. One group is going that way, the other group is going this way. When you're small in particular, you have such limited resources and such a short runway to the next fundraise. If you're not rowing in the same direction, you spin the boat around. The internal culture at Constant Contact really got the best out of people. We created a place where we challenged each other, we had healthy conflicts, but in the end, we were super aligned. I've spawned more than 10 CEOs out of Constant Contact, and they've taken these operating principles, executive team alignment, the giving and receiving of feedback, customer first, and they've brought them to other companies. We had a whole methodology for how we ran as a team that resolved stuff. So many places leave things messy and unresolved and they don't close issues, or there's a debate and executive A didn't agree with the answer and he goes running back to his team and says, "We're doing B, but I didn't like it." That was a fireable offense at Constant Contact. We disagree, we have the debate, and when we make a decision, we line up and we execute like hell.
Disagree and commit, not as a platitude, as an operating principle with real consequences. Healthy conflict, then total alignment. That's culture as execution. And that's the outsider advantage when it comes to culture. When you're building beyond the hubs, when you can't just throw money at problems, when retention matters because talent is scarce, you're forced to build culture that actually works. Your competitors can copy your product. They can poach your talent. They can outspend your go-to-market. They can copy the visible stuff, the rituals, the language, the playbook. But the real culture lives underneath all of that, in the trust people have built, in the stories they share, in the standards they hold each other to, in the feeling that work belongs to all of them. And that can't be copied. It has to be earned. But there's a cost to building something that meaningful, because founders don't create culture from a distance. They put themselves into it, their values, their instincts, their relationships, their sense of what matters. Over time, the company starts to carry pieces of them, and that can be beautiful. It's how a company becomes more than a product, more than a cap table, more than a job. But it also creates the next challenge. What happens when the thing you built starts becoming inseparable from who you are? For outsider founders, that question cuts even deeper, because the company is rarely just a company. It's the proof. Proof that the doubters were wrong. Proof that the overlooked market had power. Proof that the person who didn't fit the mold belonged in the room all along. That proof can carry you through years of scarcity, rejection, and pressure. But once the company becomes proof, it can also become a trap. Because what happens when the thing that proved who you were starts changing form? What happens when you get the outcome you were fighting for, and instead of feeling free, you feel untethered? Burks Solomon built PartPick, pioneered computer vision technology for industrial parts, and sold the company to Amazon. From the outside, it looked like the dream ending. The breakthrough technology, the acquisition, the proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. And at first, that's how it felt.
Yeah, it felt so strange to experience at the time. I mean, it was a big deposit into my account and literally not be able to get out of the bed because I was so sad. It just didn't match. It's like, you're supposed to be happy. This thing that you have been working really hard for, you have sacrificed a lot, you have postponed a lot in your life for this moment, and you are devastated. What is that about?
We celebrate the deal because it's easy to measure, but we rarely make space for the quieter part, the grief, the disorientation, the work of rebuilding identity and direction once the transaction is over. Gail Goodman experienced that when Constant Contact was acquired. 17 years building a company at a $1.1 billion exit. And instead of feeling victorious, she felt like something had died.
It was really hard. And it was weird because everybody was congratulating me. And I felt like something had died. It was the end, because it didn't feel like a victory to me. I kept waking up in the middle of the night with woulda, coulda, shoulda. If I had done this, might it have gone differently? I should have been thrilled, and I was lost. Angry, pissed at myself, pissed at a few of my leaders who didn't do things I wanted them to do, who I thought were to blame. Just generally grumpy. Finally, I decided I need to get it out of me. So I sat down and wrote all the things I effed up memo. I just really needed to get it out.
From the outside, an exit reads like a victory lap. From the inside, it can feel like loss. A sudden silence where the work used to be. The calendar clears, the fight ends, and the identity that organized your days for years suddenly has nowhere to go. And then the mind starts replaying everything. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, every mistake, every decision. For Gail, the way through started by getting it out of her head and onto a page. All the things I effed up memo. The lessons learned, the deliberate pause. But the deeper pattern is this. When the business and the self are fused, a company transition doesn't just feel professional. It feels personal. And if a successful exit can trigger that kind of identity crisis, failure can cut even deeper. Shegun Otulana founded MapInfo, took it public, and later built SOSV into one of the world's leading venture firms. But his second venture after MapInfo burned through millions and fell apart. The team fractured, and when it failed, Shegun didn't just lose money. He lost his sense of who he was.
The wake-up call to me was like, hey, you're a failure. You don't know what you're doing. You couldn't keep it together. You couldn't get the team to function well. There was too much divisiveness. And it really challenged me. I got very depressed about the situation. And frankly, I thought I was a failure. And that is a thing when I counsel and mentor startups these days, is to sort of separate the business from the personal. We have backed about 1,200 companies, probably about 3,000 different founders. And there have been, I'd say, 3 or 4 founders who have had their companies fail and then committed suicide after that. I felt that guilt and that sense of responsibility to the people that I had committed to building the business when the company failed. And there's no question I was responsible for it. I was the CEO of the company. But on the other hand, you have to basically just recognize the business is incorporated for a good reason. It is separate from the individuals that are trying their hardest to build a meaningful company. And so the failure is something you have to try in every way to prevent. But if it happens, that's just part of the game and you have to get over it. I think it's helpful to even think about it from the viewpoint of sports. You're out there, you're leaving blood on the field, but you know what? You win a game, you lose a game, it's okay. Just try your damnedest to play the game as best you can. And really just not fully identifying your success or failure with the company's failure. And frankly, the company's success. You're neither as good as your best company that you start and that you run, and as bad as the worst company that you start and you run.
You're neither as good as your best company, nor as bad as your worst one. That's the line to hold on to. Because Sean isn't saying founders should take less responsibility. He says the opposite. He was the CEO. He felt responsible. He made commitments to people. He knew the failure mattered. But responsibility is not the same as identity. A company can fail without making the founder a failure, and a company can succeed without making the founder whole. That distinction sounds obvious from the outside, but inside the pressure of building, when your name, reputation, investors, employees, family, and purpose are all wrapped up in the outcome, it can be almost impossible to feel. And that's why Sean's warning lands so heavily. When founders have no separation between the business and the self, the stakes can become dangerously personal. Not for everyone, not every time, but often enough that Sean now treats that separation as something founders need to learn before they need it. Because failure is hard enough, but when the business and the self are fused, failure doesn't just mean this didn't work. It starts to mean I didn't work. And that is a dangerous place for any founder to live. So the question becomes, how do you hold the obsession without losing the person underneath it? Because the answer cannot be care less. Great founders care too much. They think about the problem in the shower, in the car, at the airport, in the middle of the night. The question is not how to eliminate obsession. The question is how to keep that obsession from becoming your entire identity. Melodie Baan, founder and CEO of Max Retail, was given a frame that helped her understand the difference.
You are already more valuable right now than anything you will ever do or accomplish. And if you can receive that as a founder, you need to know your self-worth and you need to know who you are outside of what you build. But you also need such a deep-rooted passion for the problem you solve that nothing will veer you off course. Who am I? What is my value? I'm Melodie. I have a hat that is a founder. I have a hat that is a mother. I have a hat that is a wife, a hat that is friend. But take off all the hats. I am me, okay? And no one can take that away from me. And that is the first thing you need to win at this game, because you got to be able to take your hats off and be you every day at some point. You can't keep the hats on all the time. It is not sustainable. And you are not a hat. You are a person.
You are not a hat. Simple to say, harder to live. Because the hat gets rewarded. The hat gets introduced on stage. The hat raises capital. The hat gets written about. The hat gets congratulated when the company wins and blamed when it struggles. Founder, CEO, visionary, operator, builder, outsider, success story. Those hats can become so familiar that you start mistaking them for the person underneath it. Melodie's point is not that founders should be less passionate. It's the opposite. But you also need an identity strong enough to survive taking the hat off. That's the paradox. You need enough obsession to survive the mission, but enough separation to survive yourself. Jimena Pardo, also known as Pyme, lived that paradox. She co-founded Carrot, Mexico's first car-sharing startup, becoming a mobility expert and one of Mexico's most visible founders. Then she stepped away.
I think it happens so many times to entrepreneurs. When you go all in into a project, and on some days when you're with your family, you keep talking about it and they see you step up from dinner to take a call and make another call and on holidays to plug in, etc. You get obsessed in what you're building. And truly, I think that's the way a founder should be. But it comes with a big, big price. I started to be Pyme from Carrot. you start to blend your personality to what you do. And suddenly I was the mobility expert and the female founder image and so much exposure. And when I took the decision to leave Carrot, I did have this identity problem as, well, if I'm not Pyme from Carrot, who am I now?
That's the hidden cost of going all in. The company can start to swallow the person. The role becomes the identity, and stepping away can feel like losing the version of yourself the work created. Jimena's answer wasn't to care less, it was to separate what she built from who she was. So the next chapter didn't become a free fall.
The internal work you have to do is that it's not the position you played, it's who you are internally. And that's the only way to solve it. If you're a founder, you probably go into so many lifetimes. You will become a serial founder, you will change jobs, you will have so many faces. But if you have your inside strengthened, you will be very suited to be successful in each one of them. And with your family and friends also provide a better you because you know who you are. What I've learned is that I will always do everything I do with as much passion as I can. But at the end, it's about who you are internally.
Jimena is arriving at the same truth Melodie named, but from the other side of the experience. Melodie said, "You're not the hat." Jimena is showing what happens when the hat has become part of your name. Pyme from Carrot. So the lesson isn't less passion, it isn't less ambition, it isn't less commitment. It's knowing that the position you're playing is not the person you are. Because the position will change, the company will change, the work will change. And sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving the old role, it's realizing the old role no longer fits before you know what comes next. Jason Seitz, who co-founded SliceHost and sold it to Rackspace, felt a different version of that. For a while, he stayed inside Rackspace. But then his life changed. His daughter was born. He took paternity leave. And when he came back, the office felt different.
I started asking these questions like, oh, this is where I really want to be. And I just had one day where I was moping around the hallway and this guy saw me and he's like, look, you don't look like you feel good, man. You want to sit down and talk? He's like, you're not thinking about quitting, are you? And I told him that I was not thinking about quitting. But now that you mention it, that is exactly what I need to do.
Sometimes the identity shift arrives before the plan does. You know the old role no longer fits. You know the company doesn't need you in the same way. But knowing what you're done with is not the same as knowing what you're moving toward.
What I didn't have a plan for was what I was going to do next. And so I spent probably close to a year trying to promote various hobbies into full-time occupations and kind of flailing at it. And I was actually feeling kind of lost in a weird way because I just didn't know what to do with myself. And my identity was so coupled to what I had spent my time doing over the past 5 years.
A year of flailing, trying to promote hobbies into full-time occupations, trying to fill the space the company used to occupy. That's not laziness. It's not lack of imagination. It's identity lag. The old role has ended, but the new self has not formed yet. And in that gap, founders often try to recreate the feeling of what they had, instead of discovering what this new season is actually asking of them. Kyle Porter, who we heard from earlier about building culture at SalesLoft, tried to avoid that trap from the beginning. For Kyle, the safeguard was not detachment. He cared deeply about SalesLoft. He poured himself into it for more than a decade, but he refused to let the company become the whole story of his life.
There's two common pitfalls that founders explain. One, you hear people say being a founder is a lonely road. And the other, a lot of times you hear people say that as a founder, you really wrap your identity up in your business and your role. I recommend to anyone listening to this that you don't do either of those two things. The story of Kyle Porter doesn't end with SalesLoft. That came through Bob Lewis, my CEO coach, quite frankly, when he said the words, "Kyle, you're a holy, righteous, blameless child of the living God." And I heard that and I go, well, that's something I could tie my identity to that can never be taken away. I could tie my identity to being a great dad that could be taken away. I could tie my identity to being a great husband that could be taken away. So many things. But when I tied it to that, I think that that was the beginning of something really special for me.
When founders struggle, it's often in the same two places: isolation and identity. One is about trying to carry the whole thing alone. The other is about letting the role become the only place your self-worth lives. Kyle is pointing to a more durable foundation, something underneath the company that stays intact when the role changes. For him, that foundation was faith. For someone else, it might be family, service, craft, community, or a deeper sense of personal worth. The point is not which answer you choose. The point is having an answer the company cannot grant and cannot revoke. Because if the business becomes the only container for your purpose, every transition feels like a collapse. The way through is remembering the company was never the whole story. It may have been the clearest expression of your values, your creativity, your ambition, your commitment to a place, a problem, or a community, but those things don't disappear when the role changes. You carry them forward. And for many founders, that's what turns a hard ending into a meaningful next chapter. Not recreating what was, but using what you learned to build what comes next. That's exactly what started to happen for Burks Solomon.
And what I landed on was I need to share with people what I learned. And so I kind of put out a post, if there are any founders who want to talk about what they're working on, I'm available. So I started to turn outward to heal, and mostly to make sure that other people didn't repeat some of the mistakes that I made. And that's really what started me on the journey to become an investor. Because once I started having the coffee meetings, I began to get really excited about the company and the founders that I was meeting with. And I was like, oh, I have a little extra change right now. I can write some checks. That's really how I got into investing initially.
That's the shift. Jules' depression after the exit led her towards sharing her story, angel investing, and eventually the purpose of helping more underrepresented founders access capital. Gail's grief after constant contact eventually turned into reflection, mentoring, and helping other entrepreneurs build the lessons she had earned the hard way. Sean's failure became part of what he now teaches founders, including the importance of separating the business from the self before the pressure becomes unbearable. And Jason Seats' year of flailing after Slicehost eventually led him somewhere unexpected. Not to another company of his own, but to helping other founders build theirs. Different stories, different outcomes, same pattern. The next chapter is not always another company. Sometimes it's a wider purpose, a way to take what you learned, what you built, what you survived, and make it useful beyond your own role. That may be the real answer to the founder identity crisis. You don't stop caring about the company. You don't pretend it didn't matter. It mattered because you put yourself into it. But you are not only what you built, you are also what you carry forward from it. And for many outsider founders, that becomes the final piece of the playbook. Mentoring, investing, coaching, building institutions, turning hard-earned experience into leverage for others, creating the infrastructure they wish they had when they were starting out. That's when the Outsider Playbook expands beyond the individual founder and becomes something bigger, an ecosystem. And the question becomes, how do you build one? How do you actually create the conditions that make it easier for the next founder to believe, begin, survive, and scale? The answer across these conversations is that ecosystems don't get built by extracting value. They get built by putting energy in without knowing what you'll get back. Brad Feld, co-founder of Foundry Group and Techstars, has a name for that philosophy: give first.
It was trying to underscore how to get a positive feedback loop going in a startup community. Non-transactionally, they do not know what they're going to get back. They don't define upfront what they're going to receive, but they're willing to make the investment of energy, time, whatever the resource mix is, and they're willing to stay with it, keep putting energy in. And if you get enough of that happening, all of a sudden the flywheel starts to turn and stuff starts to happen and things start to emerge out of the startup community. It's not generosity. It's not altruism. It's not charity. It's that you're just willing to engage and see where it goes and not have to have a defined outcome. And to do that consistently as a way of being, which then leads to a bunch of other stuff.
Give first, not as a transaction, as a way of being. You put energy into the system without defining what you'll receive. And if enough people do that, the flywheel starts to turn. Things emerge, connections form, trust builds, introductions happen, capital starts to move. That's how ecosystems actually get built. But there's another crucial piece. Because before someone can give, they first have to believe it's possible for someone like them to succeed. Give first creates the behavior. Storytelling creates the permission. Linda Rottenberg, who co-founded Endeavor to support high-impact entrepreneurs in emerging markets, calls this the permission effect.
If you're an outsider, tell your story. Because if you're different, you're going to give permission to somebody else who can say, okay, if Daniela can do it, I can too. And that is hugely important.
If you're different, tell your story. Because your success gives permission. It tells the next outsider, this path exists. This is available to you. You don't have to fit the mold to build something that matters. But permission alone isn't enough. The next founder also needs someone who will believe in them before the market does. Someone who will take the first risk. That's the role Bob Compton played for Scott Dorsey and ExactTarget.
Bob was an incredible coach and mentor to us over the years, but he really gave us kind of the first big break on raising capital and giving us a chance to really start scaling the company. Bob would often ask us, if you're successful with the exact target, what would you want to do next? And I would always say, I want to be you. I want to find a way to support young entrepreneurs and put capital into their companies and provide coaching and support and really give them a chance to build something special. So Bob was an incredible role model and a real difference maker for us. And I think whenever you look at tech ecosystems that are really thriving, they have a lot of Bob Comptons.
Thriving ecosystems typically have a Bob Compton. People who lend credibility when everyone else still sees risk. People who believe before the market does. But not every founder has access to a Bob Compton. Not every community has accumulated the wealth, the networks, or the experience to provide that early support. That's the access gap Doug Song has been working to close in Michigan.
We try to be the catalyst of the capital, taking the risks on other people that a lot of the other big foundations won't. We're trying to be the friends and family money for a lot of founders here whose friends and family don't have money. And so we started some things like the Michigan Founders Fund, a peer network of 150 founders of high tech, high growth businesses here on the angel and venture sort of journey. And when you see those founders taking risks personally on behalf of their customers or their communities, we have to wrap around those people and protect them. We have to support them. That's how progress happens in our community.
That's the access gap in the most basic form. The traditional startup story assumes there's someone nearby who can take that first risk. A parent, a former boss, a wealthy connection. But in many communities, that bridge doesn't exist yet. So Doug is building the bridge, not just with checks, but with networks, visibility, and support systems that help founders get started and keep going. After Theranos, Shegun Otulana looked around Birmingham, Alabama, and saw a city with talent and opportunity, but without the gravitational pull that more established startup hubs take for granted.
So after Theranos and Therapy Brands, I didn't want to just build one more company. I wanted to actually build a system that could launch many companies. Cities like Birmingham, they have a ton of opportunity, but they suffer from attention deficit, right? The world isn't watching. You can't wait for the spotlight to shine on you. You have to generate your own gravity. You have to generate belief.
In places the world overlooks, you can't wait to be discovered. You have to create momentum yourself, build belief yourself, put infrastructure in place that helps more founders get started and get better faster. That's what Shegun is describing. Hard-won experience turned into a repeatable system. A place where talent can learn, collaborate, and keep building, even when attention is scarce. And that kind of ecosystem work is bigger than venture-backed tech. It also shows up in small businesses that create jobs, strengthen a community, and expand what feels possible locally. When Gail Goodman was building Constant Contact, she fell in love with small businesses. After her exit, she turned her energy toward helping underrepresented entrepreneurs start Main Street businesses.
I want to help people realize the dream of small business ownership, and I found and am now working with a nonprofit called Entrepreneurship for All, where we help underrepresented entrepreneurs, people who have an idea and don't know where to start. We do it exceptionally well. 3 years in, 70% of our entrepreneurs are still in business. That is 8 points better than the national average. And these are economically challenged folks who would normally fall below that. We now are able to deliver this program nationwide. I want that to be my legacy.
That's ecosystem building at ground level, not just producing unicorns, but expanding who gets to participate in entrepreneurship at all. Helping someone with an idea believe there is a real path from, I don't know where to start, to this can become a business. And once that path exists, the next question is capital. Who gets backed? Who gets believed? What kind of investor does a founder meet when they finally get in the room? Burks Solomon lived that. After selling PartPick to Amazon, she could have walked away. Instead, she became an angel investor, then co-founded Collab Capital to back underrepresented founders at scale.
My mission at Collab was really born out of my experience as a founder. I had a really difficult time as a founder raising capital. I had really challenging experiences with investors. And I made a vow to myself while I was still building my company that if I ever got on the other side of building that business, that I would become the investor that I wish I had.
A lot of ecosystem work starts with a personal gap. You go through the hard version, then build the support you didn't have, so the next founder doesn't have to do it alone. That's how experience turns into infrastructure. John Lensing, co-founder and CEO of OpenLoop in Iowa, sees his role the same way.
You need to have more people that want to contribute, that want to build a company there, because those success stories provide the inspiration for the next layer down. If I can inspire the next 20 companies that come out of the University of Iowa by telling my story, and then maybe one day help fund some of those, and then they can rely on the experience of what OpenLoop went through, then they're in a much better spot than we were. They already have a leg up.
That's how the multiplier starts. One founder succeeds, then helps 10 more. Those 10 help 100. The playbook spreads, capital starts to move, the network strengthens, the culture shifts, and eventually, what young people aspire to changes. Hernan Cazá saw that shift happen in Latin America.
When we started, all graduates were aspiring to get a job, and today they look up to joining a startup or starting a startup. And I think that shifting mentality is a very positive one.
That shifting mentality is the long game. The first generation has to prove it's possible. The next generation grows up assuming it's possible. That's how a place changes. Not all at once, not because one company exists, but because success leaves behind more than wealth. It leaves behind talent, confidence, capital, mentors, and a new default setting in the culture. The question stops being, can someone from here build a company like that? And starts becoming, why not me? But cultural shift needs champions. It needs people who make it their mission to grow the infrastructure the next generation requires. Jimena Pardo, who we heard from earlier, is doing exactly that.
I want to break the capital barrier to our regions. I want every founder in Latin America to have the opportunity to build as in the US. I want them to have the resources so they won't be limited by capital for testing their products. And whenever we do that, the next e-commerce, the next health tech, the next prop tech, the next ed tech will come not specifically from Latin America, but also from Southeast Asia, from Africa, from all around the world.
That's the global version of the same playbook. The goal is not just to celebrate founders from overlooked places after they beat the odds. It's to change the odds, to make sure the next great company is not limited by where the founder was born, who they know, or whether their region already has a mature capital stack. And that brings us to the final lesson David Cohen learned when he returned to lead Techstars. The community matters more than any single company.
The startup communities we operate in are way, way more powerful than we are as a company. And we need to continue to incentivize and reward them for being partners in what we do.
The startup communities are more powerful than the company. That may be the final lesson of the Outsider Playbook. The mistake is treating a startup community like a distribution channel, another market to enter, another place to extract from, another logo on the map. David is pointing to something deeper. The local network is the force. Any platform is only a guest inside of it. If you want durable impact, you don't extract from that community. You invest in it, reward it, build with it, because communities outlast companies. They're where founder lessons get recycled into shared advantage. A single success story says, look what they built. A movement says, look what they're building made possible. And that brings us back to the belief at the center of this show. Great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. After 25 conversations, that still feels true. But it also feels incomplete because the lesson isn't just that outsiders can build great companies. It's that the very things that make them outsiders, the underestimation, the constraints, the distance from traditional centers of power, can become part of how they build. Not automatically. Being underestimated doesn't magically become an advantage. Neither does scarcity or constraint. Sometimes those things just make the work harder. But for the founders who make it through, those pressures leave behind a playbook. Conviction before validation. Focus before abundance, creativity before resources, customer discipline before scale, resilience before traction. And if the company works, the playbook becomes more than a founder's survival toolkit. It becomes culture. It becomes how the team makes decisions, handles pressure, serves customers, and carries the work forward. That's why the company can become so hard to separate from the founder. You put so much of yourself into it that eventually you have to ask what still belongs to you when the role changes. But the playbook is yours. It's what you carry forward to the next founder, the next check, the next mentor session, the next institution, the next ecosystem. Because you know what it felt like to build without one. And that's the turn. Outsider founders don't just prove the map was wrong, they redraw it for the next person. The next founder gets a little more evidence, a little more language, a little more capital, a little more permission, a few more doors already cracked open. And if enough founders do that, the story changes. The unlikely place stops seeming so unlikely. The overlooked market stops seeming so invisible. The outsider stops sounding like an exception. And eventually, the question changes. Not, can you really build from there? But what else are we missing? That's the Outsider's Playbook. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathaway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening. And remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.